Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for inviting me to give this talk this afternoon. I'm really delighted you could all join. I'm going to give a brief introduction to two or three elements or aspects of the Chinese art program at LACMA. I've been at the museum 9 years, and it's a very exciting place to work. LACMA is the biggest art museum on the West Coast, actually the biggest art museum west of the Mississippi River. We have almost 500 employees, and it's an encyclopedic art museum, so we have art from all over the world. LACMA was founded as an independent art museum on Wilshire Boulevard at Fairfax Avenue in 1965. But the history of LACMA actually goes back earlier, when it was part of the Museum of Natural History and Science downtown in Exposition Park. That's where the art collection really started. And I think the earliest Chinese art, probably Qing Dynasty porcelain, was collected there in the 1920s. So our collection actually goes back almost 100 years. So I'd like to talk today a little bit about the museum in terms of our Chinese art collection, a little bit about the museum generally. Then I'd like to talk a little bit about our exhibitions of Chinese art that we have been organizing and continue to organize going into the future. And then I want to talk about contemporary Chinese art, because this is a relatively new area for American museums to collect. And we intend to be at the forefront of this initiative. So we'll cover a lot of ground. So I'll just jump right in. This is our very iconic sculpture of antique street lamps from Los Angeles, which is right at the entrance of the museum on Wilshire Boulevard. It's a work by a contemporary artist, American artist named Chris Burden. It's called Urban Light, and it has been there, I think, just over 10 years. And it's interesting. This has also become kind of a symbol of Los Angeles. The museum, as I said, is encyclopedic. We have probably over 40 curators in many different departments, including European art, African art, almost every area of Asian art, including China, Korea, Japan, India, Sri Lanka, Himalayas, including Nepal and Tibet and Kashmir, and then Southeast Asia as well. So we have quite a big team, but I'm just going to focus on Asian art today. This is our director, Michael Govan, on the left, with two easily recognizable Hollywood stars. Leonardo DiCaprio is a big friend of LACMA. He's been very supportive. He's also an important collector in LA. And Michael is a wonderful director to work with and to work for, because he has very much the sensibility of an artist. He trained initially as a graphic designer, and it's wonderful to work for him because he is not afraid to take risks, either intellectual risks or unusual partnerships with other museums around the world. And so all of us who work at LACMA feel very fortunate to have someone like him at the helm, who has an interest in almost anything, loves to learn, is very grounded as an individual. And so I just wanted to give him some credit, because a lot of what we're doing in Chinese art would not happen without his support. This is a computer rendering of LACMA's new building. We are going to be demolishing a lot of our 1965 buildings and building this new building designed by the Swiss architect Peter Zumthor, which will open in 2024. So actually, the demolition has already begun. this is not without controversy, this building and the demolition of the old buildings. But having worked in the old buildings for 9 years, I can tell you they were very tired, very outmoded. They leaked terribly if it rained into the art storerooms in the basement. And many of the steel support structures of the old buildings were completely rusted out. And I am the biggest fan of our new building. I think it will be the most important new building in Los Angeles since the Disney Concert Hall downtown, which is amazingly already 17 years old. And it's strange that there's not been any sort of world famous destination architecture in LA since the Disney Concert Hall. And I predict the new LACMA building will be an important draw for art lovers all over the world. LACMA already has very good attendance. In fact, not that we compete, but I should mention that LACMA's attendance has surpassed the Getty Museum's attendance for 3 years in a row already now. And everybody goes to the Getty. All tourists go to the Getty. But LACMA is doing amazing and very interesting things, very unusual things in terms of exhibitions in particular. This is our team in the Chinese art department at LACMA. So that's me on the left. Next to me is Kong Wan, who is from Taiyuan in Shanxi. She is also a specialist in Chinese painting, which is my main interest. Next to her is Susanna Farrell, who is our new curator of contemporary Chinese art. And then at the far right is Einor Cervone, who is recently got her PhD at Harvard, and her field is both Chinese art history and Chinese literature and Chinese theater. So we have a fantastic team, and I'm thrilled to be able to mentor this group who are all going to be doing amazing exhibitions on their own. And I will talk about the shows they're working on, which will be coming in the future toward the end. LACMA's collection of traditional Chinese art is very strong because we are not such an old museum. I mean, as an independent art museum in LA, as I mentioned before, only founded in 1965. So we recently celebrated our 50th anniversary. So we don't have the longevity or the deep collections of some of the older museums, for example, on the East Coast or the Midwest, that also have great Chinese art collections, like the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, or the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, or the Freer and Sackler Galleries at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, or the Cleveland Museum of Art, or the Art Institute of Chicago. But our collection is very strong, and it is fairly representative from the Neolithic period in China, particularly in ceramics, early ceramics and jade. We have a small but spectacular collection of Shang and Zhou and Han bronze vessels. We have one of the biggest Chinese lacquer collections, and there's an example at the upper right, in the United States. I would say the biggest single part of LACMA's Chinese collection are ceramics, and they range in date from the Neolithic period, Xin Shi Qi Shi Dai, all the way up through the end of the Qing dynasty. And this is a very rare blue and white porcelain dish at the lower left, made during the Yuan dynasty, when blue and white porcelain was first invented at Jang Da Chan. We have a lot of very fine ceramic tomb sculpture ranging from the Han through the Tang dynasties. And this Han horse from Sichuan is a great example. It's quite big. It's well over 1 meter tall. And then these beautiful chairs at the lower right date from the Kangxi reign of the early Qing dynasty. We don't have a lot of Chinese furniture. This is an area within Chinese art that has become very expensive, especially the traditional hardwoods of Huang Huali, and so on. But it's a very good collection, and in the area of ceramics, we could write a textbook on the history of Chinese ceramics just using LACMA's collection. Because my own specialty is Chinese painting and calligraphy, and also ceramics, I'm always very interested in studying any museum's permanent collection. We have a fairly small collection of traditional Chinese painting, ranging in date from the Southern Song Dynasty up through up to the present, actually, up until the 20th century. These are just a few examples here of our traditional Chinese paintings. We have about 100. So it's a small collection compared to other museums on the East Coast that have hundreds of Chinese paintings, but it's quite a good collection. The painting at the upper left of the pomegranate, sort of rotting pomegranate, is from the Southern Song Dynasty. It's one of our earliest Chinese paintings. The painting next to it is by the great early Qing artist Shi Tao, a landscape, a part of an album of landscapes. At the far right is our one painting by Wen Jingming, one of the most famous painters of Suzhou in Jiangsu in the early 16th century. And this painting also is notable for having once been in the Qianlong collection in the Forbidden City. At the end of the Qing, although most of the collection stayed in the palace, and then, as I'm sure you know, in 1949, large parts of it were taken by Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan. A lot of things sort of during the reign of Puyi left with former palace staff. Puyi himself took hundreds of paintings with him during the early Republic period when the government of Sun Yat-sen turned the Palace Museum in Beijing into a public museum for the first time. And Puyi ended up in what's now Liaoning province in Shenyang. At the end of World War II, he was arrested by the Soviet army and turned over to Chairman Mao. And as you know, I'm sure ended up his life in Beijing as a gardener. But all of the paintings that he took with him, since he considered them his own collection, are still in Shenyang. And that's one of the greatest collections of Chinese painting anywhere in the world. And then the lower left, a late Ming painting by Xiang Shengmo, probably our best hand scroll painting. Just a few exhibitions that we've done of Chinese art over the past 7 or 8 years. I'm just showing you some highlights here. In 2013, we did an exhibition of Ming Dynasty court painting from the Shanghai Museum. The Shanghai Museum is a museum I've had a relationship with since 1986. And they had never loaned to LACMA. So we did a small show of 10 paintings from their collection in 2013, just to create a new relationship between the Shanghai Boguan and LACMA. In 2014, we did a show that had never been done before on really an examination of Japanese taste in Chinese painting, going back to the Song and Yuan periods. It included some Ming Dynasty paintings, but the Japanese have historically loved Chinese art, certainly looked to China as a kind of mother culture in many respects, including city planning. So many elements of Japanese art that we think of as Japanese, like the tea ceremony, folding screens, these are all Chinese in origin. And I have spent a lot of time studying Chinese art in Japan, Japanese collections. So we did a very interesting show in 2014 on really examining how Japanese taste in Chinese paintings differs from Chinese taste, and how many of these paintings in Japan have been in Japan for 500-600 years already. In 2015, we did a one-room show on the contemporary Chinese artist Xu Bing, which was our first real exhibition of contemporary Chinese art. In 2016, we organized a huge exhibition on 17th century Chinese painting, so late Ming and early Qing, with a very big catalog. This was based on a Chinese collection in Berkeley, formed by a well-known art dealer, originally from Tianjin, Cao Zhongying. And we had his collection on loan for about 5 years. And it was a fantastic enterprise. I'll show you some slides of that installation. And then in 2018, we did again a one gallery show on the tradition and the tradition of collecting stones, guaishi, strange stones in China. And we had as its centerpiece probably the greatest Chinese painting of stone ever done by the late Ming artist Wu Bin. So I'll show you some details of that. Just a few images from the 17th century Chinese paintings exhibition from the Cao family collection. This was the installation. This was an enormous show, probably over 120 paintings by almost every really famous Chinese painter of the late Ming and early Qing. In the background, you'll see a set of hanging scrolls by the late Ming painter and calligrapher Dong Qichang. And there were, I think, 11 or 12 works by Dong Qichang in this exhibition. And this is a one small painting by the early Qing painter Bada Shanren, who was a relative of the Ming imperial house, but he lived after the Ming in the early Qing. A rather tormented individual, a very eccentric painter. This is from an album of many leaves, both landscapes and images of birds and rocks, from the Cao collection in Berkeley. The exhibition on Wu Bin, 10 Views of a Lingbi Stone, was held in late 2017-2018. This is the long hand scroll, which was the centerpiece of that exhibition. And this was unique at the time in Chinese history when it was painted around 1610, I believe. This was, 1610. This is a long hand scroll in ink on paper of 10 views of one stone. One very magnificent stone painted that was in a collection in Beijing in the last years of the Ming, owned by an artist named Mi Wanzhong, and official. He was the greatest collector of stones in the late Ming. And this is a detail of Wu Bin's painting of this stone that Mi Wanzhong owned. The inscriptions are by Mi Wanzhong. And it's the artist Wu Bin turned the stone in 10 different angles and painted these portraits of them in amazing detail. And it's, I would say, one of the top 5 Chinese paintings anywhere in the world, a really rare work. The exhibition consisted mostly of stones, and I just wanted to show this. This is a great Taihu stone from the Great Lake, the Taihu Lake in Jiangsu province. This is one of the most famous types of strange stones, or guaishi, in Chinese history. And this one probably came out of the lake sometime during the Ming Dynasty. And we were able to buy it from a private collection in Beijing, from one of the great connoisseurs of Chinese stones. It was not easy to get this, and it was a lot of money. But it's an authentic Taihu stone. And these stones came from the bottom of the lake. They are known as early as the Northern Song Dynasty in the 11th century. The current exhibition, The Art of Cho Ying, is one that we have been working on for 5 years. So I just want to focus a little bit on this because it opened on February 9th. And then LACMA had to close to the public on March 14th, as almost every other museum in the United States closed to the public because of the coronavirus. So I'm very happy that LACMA is planning to reopen to the public in early July, probably around July 6th. The date is not fixed yet, and there will be all kinds of social distancing protocols in place for visitors coming to the museum, including paperless ticketing, online ticketing, and so far. But this exhibition is the first exhibition ever held on the Ming painter Cho Ying, who is a great master of what's known as the Wu School, based in Suzhou in the Middle Ming during the reign of the Jiajing Emperor. And I have been obsessed with this artist for over 40 years. It started when I was a much younger curator at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, and was asked to authenticate a group of fan paintings, folding fan paintings by Cho Ying, before they were purchased by the museum. And that I realized that Cho Ying was a very mysterious artist, and very little known about him. He was a professional painter. We think from relatively low social class. He was born in the small town of Taicang, which is just on the northern border of the modern city of Shanghai. We know that as a young man, Cho Ying moved to Suzhou, which was one of the most affluent, prosperous cities in China in the 16th century. And by the end of his life, or shortly thereafter, Cho Ying is considered one of the 4 great masters of the Wu school, Wu being the area around Suzhou. But he is still a very mysterious person. He's not a classical Wenren. So we don't, the other 3 of the 4 great masters of the Wu school are Shenzhou, Wen Jingming and Tang Bohu. And they all wrote lots of poems and texts. They each have a Wenji, or collected literary works. Cho Ying does not. But Cho Ying was clearly accepted as a great painter by these artists and by all the officials and collectors and patrons in Suzhou during his lifetime. And this is a typical painting by Cho Ying, the Emperor Guangwu fording a river. It depicts at the bottom center the first emperor of the Eastern Han Dynasty, Han Guangwu, fording a river. And Guangwu Di was famous even during the Eastern Han for putting the Han imperial family back on the throne after the Wang Mang interregnum, which divided the Western Han from the Eastern Han. So politically, he was a big culture hero, very much admired. It took him about 20 years during his life to reestablish the Han imperial family, the Liu family, onto the throne of China, and he established the Eastern Han capital at Luoyang. This style of blue and green landscape is the style of painting for which Cho Ying is best known, heavily painted with azurite, which is the blue, and malachite, which is the green pigments. These are minerals that produce these very vibrant pigments. And that's Cho Ying's signature at the right. And I'm showing this painting because the world had sort of forgotten that this painting is in the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa since 1956. And I don't think it had ever been seen in a museum in the United States. So it's in fantastic condition. This was also a very famous Cho Ying painting in the late Ming. It was discussed by Dong Qichang, this great artist and critic and collector, and was in a very important early Qing collection of a man named Liang Qingbiao. And this, I should mention, is also the style of Cho Ying's painting which is most faked, most copied from his lifetime up to the present. Cho Ying is interesting because he's one of the most faked and copied painters in Chinese history. So one of the biggest challenges in organizing an exhibition on Cho Ying or publishing anything about Cho Ying is that for every genuine Cho Ying painting, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of forgeries, and he is still being forged today. That's how popular he is. But he actually was a very eclectic artist. And I'll show you some other examples of his work. And I hope after LACMA reopens that you'll be able to come to LACMA and see this exhibition. It's sort of once in a lifetime opportunity. There are over 40 paintings by Cho Ying in the exhibition, and then another 20 by his teachers and predecessors and followers. So we examined the whole issue of forgery and how do we decide what's authentic and what's not in the exhibition. And that's unusual for a museum exhibition. Most museums don't get into that issue of how do you determine authenticity in Chinese painting. Another myth about Cho Ying, very interesting, is that he was illiterate, that he could not write, and that he could not even write his name on his paintings. And we prove in this exhibition that that was not true, that he was not only literate, but highly literate. This is a very rare letter written by Cho Ying, probably around the middle of his career, to one of his patrons, who seems to have been connected with an imperial doctor in the Forbidden City. And this is shown to the public for the first time ever in LACMA's exhibition. Also, we did a very detailed study of Cho Ying's signatures on his paintings, because the ongoing myth is that he couldn't write his name, and it's quite obvious when you study 100 of his signatures that actually he did write his name. And I'm showing 3 examples of his signatures here. This is still a very contentious issue, but no one had ever done a kind of analytical survey of Cho Ying's handwriting or calligraphy before. So these are just 3 randomly chosen signatures by Cho Ying. On the far left, on a gold fan painting in the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, in standard script or kaishu, which is his most normal style, most frequent style of calligraphy. Cho Ying Shifu Zhi. Shifu is his zi, made by Cho Ying Shifu. In the middle here is a signature by Cho Ying written in clerical script, this Han Dynasty style script, a very archaic script by the Ming Dynasty. And there are many examples of Cho Ying's inscriptions in this clerical script, which is a very elegant, beautiful sort of architectural script. This is also on a fan in the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, Wu Cho Ying Shifu. And the seal here, which is Cho Ying's seal, reads Shizhou, 10 continents, which is his Hao, and is also a Taoist name. It refers to a late Han Dynasty Taoist text found in the Daozang, or the Taoist canon, called the Record of the 10 Continents, Shizhou Ji. And that phrase does not appear anywhere else in Chinese culture. So I think he may have been a practicing Taoist. That's a bit speculative. But then on the right, we have a very rare inscription, signature by Cho Ying in seal script, the Xiaozhuan script from the late Bronze Age. And this painting actually has a date, which is very rare in Cho Ying's work. It's dated to a year of the Jiajing Emperor, who reigned from 1522 to 66. This is dated equivalent to 1549. Wu Men is an old name for Suzhou. He painted it on a spring day in this year, and then Cho Ying Zhi. These are 4 examples of his clerical script inscriptions, just to give you an idea of his skill. 4 very consistent examples of his clerical script. And then I thought it might be fun to show you some fake Cho Ying signatures, because there are literally thousands of fake signatures and fake paintings by Cho Ying from his own lifetime going up, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries. Copies made in Suzhou, called generically Sujopian, or slices, bits of Suzhou. So these are all fake. These are all 18th, 19th century fakes, fake signatures by other artists trying to copy Cho Ying. And interestingly, the signature on the far right here is actually by a Japanese artist named Tani Buncho. So he was faked in Japan also and copied, which is illustrating how famous he was, not only in Japan, but Korea. Korean painters in the Choson dynasty and Japanese painters in the Edo period were well aware of Cho Ying's work, and there were both original and fake Cho Ying paintings exported to both Korea and Japan. Cho Ying himself was a copier. This is a very good example on the right of Cho Ying's copy of the Song Dynasty painting on the left, showing a scholar seated in his studio with a landscape screen behind him and a portrait of the same scholar hanging on the screen. And we have a number of examples of this in the exhibition, of Cho Ying's copies of old, including Tang and Song and Yuan paintings. We also, because we were interested in the history of copying, on the left is a painting by Cho Ying in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. This is called a Harp Player in a Pavilion. And on the right is a recently discovered copy of Cho Ying's painting by Cho Ying's daughter, who is even more elusive than Cho Ying himself. Cho Ying's daughter was named Cho Ju. And we found this painting on the right in the basement of the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, having been cataloged for decades as a fake Cho Ying, and no one bothered to read the artist's seal, which is the nickname or Hao of Cho Ying's daughter. So very important evidence that Cho Ying's daughter also copied, although this is not a forgery, it's an honest copy of Cho Ying's work. And we end the show with some examples of Sujopian. So these are copies of Cho Ying's work done after he died. This one from the late Ming, a copy of probably Cho Ying's most famous work in Taipei in the Palace Museum there, Han Gong Chun Xiao, Spring Morning in the Han Palace. This is a later copy of that work, and there are many, many copies of this work. And then this is an outright forgery of the story of by Tao Yuanming, the Taoyuanji, the Peach Blossom Spring, one of the most famous accounts of encountering a utopia. And Cho Ying certainly painted this. His original doesn't exist anymore, but this is a detail of a long hand sculpt from the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, which they know to be a forgery, but it's 18th century. It's probably from the Qianlong period. So a lot of fakes are old and beautiful, and one has to be really careful not to judge things too quickly. This painting also has a fake seal of the Qianlong Emperor and a fake seal of Pu Yi, the last emperor. And then I wanted to end the Cho Ying discussion with this comparison, on the left is a painting by Cho Ying, a late work in Kansas City, Missouri, in the Nelson Atkins Museum, one of the greatest collections of Chinese art in the United States. On the right is a copy of that work by the great 20th century painter Jang Da Chan, who owned the painting on the left during the World War II. And in 1947, he did this copy on the right, which is now in a private collection in Hong Kong, of the Cho Ying painting. And in fact, Jang Da Chan's seal is barely visible in the rocks from when he owned this work. So we have these hanging next to each other. It's a rare example of Jang Da Chan copying Cho Ying. So I'd like to speak just quickly about some forthcoming exhibitions. And these are being organized by our younger curatorial staff. LACMA has about 100 examples of Chinese lacquer. And Einor Chervone on our staff is organizing a big exhibition of East Asian lacquer. So lacquer from China, Korea, and Japan. We have, I think, 400 Japanese lacquers. And they have never been shown together in a coherent exhibition. So I'm showing you just a few slides of Chinese lacquers in LACMA's collection. This is a Han Dynasty, so very early, probably Western Han, so over 2,000 years old. It's a small wooden box with silver fittings and then beautiful gold painting on top of the black lacquer, probably a small cosmetic box. This is an amazing early Ming cinnabar or red lacquer box. And this is one of the greatest Chinese lacquers in LACMA's collection. It's just a spectacular example. And I wanted to show you a detail of the bottom of this piece. This has an inscription. This had an inscription originally dating to the Yongle reign of the early Ming. Yongle, very famous emperor who moved the capital from Nanjing back to Beijing after the Yuan dynasty. Yongle, his reign is a really high point in Chinese art, especially in ceramics, blue and white porcelain, and also in lacquer. And in the subsequent Xuan De reign, somebody erased the Yongle mark, which you can see here, sort of slightly visible, and wrote a new Xuan De reign mark on top, Da Bing, Xuan De, Nianzhi. But you can still see the Yongle mark. So it's in, this was sort of reappropriated with a new reign mark in the Xuan De period. So our collection is full of fascinating little details like this. And of course, the lacquer exhibition will include some contemporary art. This is one of the greatest contemporary lacquer artists in China, Su Xiaobai, born in 1949. He lives in Shanghai, studied for many years in Germany. This is a very large work with multiple layers of blue lacquer. And this is a promised gift to LACMA. So I'd like to just do a quick survey of modern art at LACMA and then finish with a quick survey of contemporary art. And then we'll have some time for questions. From our permanent collection, we're lucky to have quite a good selection of early 20th century Chinese painting, because many American museums tend not to collect Chinese paintings after the end of the Qing dynasty. And we have some great examples. This is a landscape by Pu Ru, who was a cousin of Pu Yi, the last Qing emperor. Zhao Shaoang, another very famous painter, 20th century, who lived to be almost 100, not quite. This is a painting done in 1940. We have one Jang Da Chan painting in the permanent collection, which is this one, painted in 1943, of a Tibetan woman dancing and holding a small bowl of wine. Fu Baoshi, another very famous painter. This is from 1961. You'll know, I'm sure, that some of these painters left China after 1949. Jang Da Chan moved to, I think, Argentina, and then Brazil, and then Carmel in California, and then at the end of his life moved to Taipei. Fu Baoshi stayed in China after 1949, did a lot of very important commissions for the government in the People's Republic. Liu Guosong was born in China but moved to Taiwan. He is still very active, an amazing artist, and this is a classic, very abstract landscape by him from 1964. Kong Wan on our staff is organizing a major exhibition on the 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century painter Huang Binhong. And I just wanted to show you a few examples. These are 2 album leaf landscapes in LACMA's collection. We will also examine Huang Binhong's calligraphy. He was a great calligrapher. He was a great art historian. He was an important art historian. He was very interested also in Western art in the 1920s and 30s. And this is a fantastic calligraphy work from 1932, which shows a lot of influence from Art Deco graphic design, which was all the rage in Shanghai in the 1930s. And then just finishing with contemporary art, we had our first major huge exhibition of contemporary Chinese art last year. This was curated by Susanna Farrell on our staff. The curator for this show, the originating curator, was Professor Huang from University of Chicago, who is a trained, comes from Beijing, got his PhD at Harvard, trained in both Chinese archaeology and now one of the leading experts on contemporary Chinese art. So this was an enormous exhibition, got a lot of visitors, and we are really committed to developing contemporary Chinese art at LACMA. One of the most exciting new developments is the promised gift to LACMA of 400 contemporary ink paintings, mostly from China. There are some from outside of China, for example, from Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, a handful of European artists, but most of these works are by contemporary Chinese artists. And this is a promised gift from a foundation in Geneva, Switzerland, created by a couple named Jard and Dora Cognier. It's a huge gift. And we will do a big exhibition introducing it later next year. So these are just a few of the brilliant ink paintings in this large gift of 400 works that's coming to LACMA. These are all living artists. Liu Dan from Nanjing, now living in Beijing. Li Huasheng from Chengdu, who died, sadly, of cancer 2 years ago. And this collection contains, in many cases, multiple works of art by a given artist. Lin Tianmiao is one of the leading female artists in China. She works a lot with silk and cotton, and this is a photograph which has been, which has layers of thread on it. And she creates these very mysterious images of actual places, but manipulated with threads also. The Fondation Ink collection also has some amazing examples of contemporary Chinese calligraphy. And Wang Dongling, who teaches at the China Academy of Fine Arts in Hangzhou, born in 1945, this is his very contemporary transcription of the Heart Sutra, one of the shortest of all Buddhist texts, the Xinjing. Very beautiful work, and we have numerous works by him coming. And this gift, this promised gift from Switzerland, has encouraged many other gifts of contemporary art to LACMA by other donors, by artists, by collectors, by dealers. Zheng Chongbin is an artist from Shanghai. He lives now in Marin County. He studied in Hangzhou at the China Academy of Fine Arts. This is a work from 2013 that was a gift from a local collector in Los Angeles. He is also a video artist, a fantastic video artist. This is a still from one of his more recent videos, Branches Are Roots in the Sky, from 2016. From a foundation in Irvine, we were given this huge photograph, 9 meters across and 3.5 meters tall, by Haibo, who's one of the greatest living contemporary photographers in China. It shows an ancient, probably Ming Dynasty wall with a bunch of blind beggars. And only one figure here can see. It's the son of this beggar. It's a very moving, very, very magnificent, large work, unusually large for a photograph. Susanna Farrell on our staff is now organizing an exhibition on contemporary Buddhist art. I'll just show you a couple slides. This is a work by the famous Chinese artist Zhang Huan, who lives in Beijing. An enormous copper sculpture of the Buddha's hand. We will incorporate into that show some traditional Chinese Buddhist art from LACMA's collection. And we'll also include some works by other artists in Asia and possibly one or two from Europe and America. This is by the great Korean video artist Nam Jun Paik, probably the founder of video art. This we do not own, but will borrow. And that's it. So I would be happy to entertain your questions.
Wow, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Little, for this fabulous talk. So now we will ask Tim to moderate the Q&A session.
Sure.
Tim, please.
All right. So thanks for the excellent talk, Dr. Stephen Little.
Sure, thank you.
I enjoy every minute. So before moving on to the QA session, let me introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Tim Fu. I'm one of the founders of the Huang University of Science and Technology Alumni Association of Southern California. Also serve as the first president for the association. It's quite an honor to to have opportunity to organize this the Chinese Culture Series with the 4 other the wonderful organizers. So all right, let's go to the question. I already received some questions from the chat room. So
Yes.
basically, what I'm going to do is, I will take the question from the chat room.
Okay.
And I share the screen. Then, Dr. Little will answer from there one by one. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let me share the screen. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I already copied 2 questions. That actually they raised the question during the talk. So maybe you can start with the first one.
Yes, I can read it.
Okay.
Are the Sung and Ming Dynasty paintings from LACMA included in the large compilations Songhua Quanji and Minghua Quanji? They are not yet. That's an ongoing series, as I understand it, of books, very beautiful and high resolution images. But you can go onto LACMA's website and see all of our Chinese paintings under LACMA collections. So if you just type into the search bar, China painting, you'll get all of them, and you can click on them with bigger images and a description of the paintings. So almost all of LACMA's collections are available online. And we are planning a new catalog written by our staff of all of the Chinese paintings, traditional paintings in our collection. And the next question, could you please ask to give a basic introduction about Chinese painting collections of North American museums? Yes. There are important collections of Chinese paintings in American museums starting at different times in different museums. But one of the earliest was the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which actually opened, I think, in the 1870s. And a lot of scientists and scholars from Boston worked in Japan during the Meiji period, and they acquired many Japanese paintings and a number of very important Chinese paintings that had been in Japan probably since the Sung and Yuan dynasties. And that's probably the most, I would say Boston's collection is the largest and in some ways the best. It's hundreds and hundreds of paintings. The Sung and Yuan paintings in Boston have been very well published in a catalog over 20 years ago by their curator, Wu Tong. But they can all be seen online also. If you go to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts website and go to collection, and again, just type in China or Chinese painting, you'll get to see all of their paintings. There are old collections at the Freer Gallery in Washington, part of the Smithsonian. That started in the 1920s because Charles Freer, who was a private collector in Detroit, very fascinated by Asian art, actually traveled to Beijing before the end of the Qing dynasty. And then and immediately following, there are a lot of Chinese paintings sold, especially by old Manchu collectors in Beijing. And he was able to buy some great examples. A lot of what he bought were fake because he wasn't really a connoisseur. He wasn't an expert. He didn't read Chinese. But he ended up with some amazing things. For example, they have, I think, 2 or 3 genuine paintings by Cho Ying and 30 copies, which he bought as real. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, their collection of Chinese paintings started in the 20s or 30s, kind of a mixed bag, but now, especially since the 70s, they have built one of the most important collections of Chinese paintings in America, in New York. And then there are great collections in the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. And there's a very good collection, not a big collection, but a very good collection of Chinese paintings in the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. And that's a collection I know very well because that was my first curatorial job in the late 1970s. So that's a collection I know very well. So it's the history sort of spans almost a century of collecting. I mean, the total numbers of Chinese paintings in American museums do not compare to the number of Chinese paintings in mainland China or in Taiwan. Those are huge, thousands and thousands of paintings. Even today, still in Beijing, in the Gugong, the Shanghai Museum, the Nanjing Museum, but there are important Chinese paintings all over the world. I have a question. Do you think the background of Cho Ying makes him different from other Wu masters such as Tang Yin or Wen Jingming? Yes, in this way. Tang Yin and Wen Jingming were sort of classic Wen Ran. So they're famous for their poetry, they're famous for their calligraphy, and they're famous for their paintings. If Wen Jingming only did calligraphy, he would still be one of the most famous artists. Cho Ying is famous only for his paintings. He's not known as a calligrapher. I don't think he benefited from a classical education, although I think he was able to read and to write. And in fact, even about 70 years before he was born, the imperial government in the early Ming established public schools throughout China in every major city during the reign of the Zhengtong emperor. And I'm sure in Suzhou there was such a school because merchants had to read and write. Buddhist monks had to read and write. In fact, Buddhist monks were always among the most literate people because they had to deal with all these classical Buddhist texts translated from Sanskrit into Chinese as early as the Tang Dynasty and even earlier. But I would say, to answer your question, I would say Cho Ying was respected by these other Wenran because of his skill in painting. He could do things they could not do. And they were great technicians also. They were great painters, and they had no problem admiring the work of Cho Ying just because he was such an incredible artist. He could paint in almost any different style, which they could not do. And Wen Jingming, there are at least 6 Cho Ying paintings in the world today, mostly in China, in museums that have inscriptions or poems written on them by Wen Jingming's children, Wen Jia, Wen Peng, and about 20 of his students. There are 4 paintings by Cho Ying inscribed with inscriptions by Dong Qichang, by his friend Chen Jiru. So I think this show is really helping. I hope it will cause people not to approach Chinese painting with preconceived notions of social class, because I think in the Ming, social classes were quite flexible, especially in a city like Suzhou. And people loved skill. And they had no problem admiring and inscribing Cho Ying's work with their own tiba. Does your museum have an art library? Yes, we have a very good library. It's also encyclopedic. It covers the entire world. We are trying to build a stronger library, especially in Chinese art, especially in Chinese painting, calligraphy. But we're lucky to have quite a good library. And also, of course, we use interlibrary loans from UCLA, USC, Irvine, Riverside, and even the Getty Research Institute, and other libraries around the country. Let's see, I'm curious whether your museum has a conservation lab to fix or restore old, fragile paintings or calligraphies. If not, how do you maintain these fragile items? That's a very good question. We have a very big conservation department with many specialists. We also have several conservation scientists who can analyze pigments, analyze different kinds of stone or metal. This can really help us date a work whose date might be in question. We do not have a conservator for Asian scroll paintings. And in fact, there are very few American museums that do. I can think of maybe 4 or 5 that have on staff. Fortunately, most of our Chinese paintings are in good condition and don't need conservation. We have a very good paper conservator on staff who is from Japan, and she's good at minor repairs, fixing a crack or a crease in a painting. But to remount a painting that has, say, a lot of insect damage or a water damage, that would mean we have to send it to another lab either in the United States or in Asia. And in other jobs, I have sent Chinese paintings to the conservation lab at the Shanghai Museum, and also to certain labs in Japan. If the painting was in Japan for several centuries and has a traditional Japanese silk brocade mounting, occasionally we will try and keep that because that's part of its history. But I hope someday we can have our own conservator for Asian paintings.